using this song as a model for some typical modal uses of harmony and melody. Norwegian Wood by Paul McCartney and John Lennon. In the last video we went through and we talked about the basics, reminded ourselves of the basics of functional harmony, and started to get into why modal harmony is different. We got as far as talking about character notes, how each mode has a note that distinguishes it from the other modes, and the importance of knowing those and knowing those character notes in each mode. What we're going to do now is go through the notes that I prepared for you and deal with each issue as we go, and as we do we'll then pick up our thread about how it is that we organize modal music, or not borrowing that dominant function from functional music. So what we do is, I'll just go through the notes. The first thing is, of course, the order of the modes, the fact that you can make a mode from any scale, and some scales are more popular in other parts of the world and in other types of music. Those are the most common. And in other areas of the world, you'll encounter modes of harmonic minor, melodic minor, and other synthetic scales and so on, and their modes. In modal music, there are two overall categories of chords. Tonic, which is some form of the one chord. There's no substitution chords for the tonic in modal music. It's just the one chord is the tonic chord. And then everything else is in the non-tonic category. The next main point is modal systems are fragile. They can easily be, by using a particular note or chord at a given point in this music, you can easily push it towards sounding like it's in its relative major key. So to avoid that, one of the things we do is we avoid the dominant function use of the diatonic dominant seventh chord. Since all modes are transpositions of the relative major has a dominant seventh chord in it diatonically, and so will all the modes. To give an example of this, let's look at our diatonic harmony again. But now if we think about what will happen when we transpose this to make it a Dorian mode, this will become the one chord, 1 minor 7, and this will become 2 minor 7, and so on, and of course this chord will become 4 7. And this chord will become, when you get to the end here, will become flat 7 major 7. I hadn't labeled everything as if it would be transposed to Dorian, to D Dorian. What we're talking about is how we want to avoid the use of this chord going down a fifth. Now, a very common Dorian progression is to go from 1 minor to 4 7, this kind of a sound. As used in the Santana song. The sound of 1 minor 7 going to 4 7. And that's fine as long as you keep it like that. The ear is going to hear the D as 1. If I make my progression at some point go down a fifth to the so-called flat 7 major 7, look what's going to happen. Here it goes. Just starts to make it sound like it's in C major. It sounds like this has become 2, this has become 5, and that's become 1. The power of a dominant chord going down a fifth is too strong. It overwhelms the mode. So that's what is meant by this statement, that modal systems are fragile, that you have to be careful to avoid things push you towards hearing it in the relative major key. So avoid having the diatonic dominant seventh chord, which will be present in every mode. Avoid having that ever resolve down a perfect fifth. Also, avoid the use of any diminished triad. These are called avoid chords, and also the minor 7 flat 5. For similar reasons, they have a tritone, and they also have the potential to sound like a dominant functioning chord. Item 4. Every mode has a character note. We already talked about that. But how is that used? Well, it's always on a half step point, and that makes it inherently an unstable pitch. It's often used as a note to cadence to a stable pitch. It's always present in so-called character chords. These are chords which have the character note as either 1, 5, 3, or 7 in their structure. And the 1, 5, 3, 7 is also the order of the strength of the character sound. So a chord which has the character note as the 1 or the 5 is going to be more powerfully cadential than a chord that has the character note as its 7th scale degree or chord degree. So this is character chords is how we create a feeling of cadence and movement in modal music. What is the character note of Dorian, 6th scale degree? We went over that in a previous video. And look for the chords that have the 6th scale degree. I want you to pause the video on this page and then mark down which of these chords contain that 6th scale degree. That is, it would be a B natural in D Dorian, if you think of this as D Dorian. Hopefully you figured it out. So I've marked each one with a C for character note. So we can see this chord, this major 7 chord, which would be called flat 7 major 7 in Dorian, has a B natural in it, so it's a character chord. This E minor 7 chord, which would be 2 minor 7 in D Dorian, has a B in it. The B is the 5th of the chord. It's a character chord. This dominant chord, which would be 4/7 in the key of D, in the mode of D Dorian, has a B in it as its 3rd, and it's a character chord. Minor 7 flat 5 chord, which is 6 minor 7 flat 5 in D Dorian, has a B in it, and so it could potentially be a character chord. But if you recall, just a minute ago we talked about how we avoid the use of any diminished or minor 7 flat 5 chord. So that's out of the running. That cannot be used modally for its problems. So it's out. Then that leaves us 3 remaining character chords. You'll recall that if the character note is in the root, it's the strongest, but that one's not available. If it's the 5th, that's the next strongest. So this would actually be the next strongest one right here, because the B is the 5th. And then if it's the 3rd, that's quite strong too, and then the 7th is the least of all. Now, that any of them could be used as character chords and cadential chords, but this might be the best choice to make it most powerfully obvious. So 2 minor 7. So here's our C major scale, reminding ourselves of functional harmony, and this would be the typical way to create a cadence there. A Dorian arrangement of things would involve that you have a chord with the character note in it. So there it is, 2 minor 7. There's the B natural, and we'll create a cadence that way with that chord. So that's a Dorian cadence, and that's the use of a character chord to be used as a cadential chord back to 1. And you can actually do this with any mode. You just play the mode once, and then you do the character chord, and then you do the 1 chord, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what that character chord will do in the context of the mode. Some main characteristics of modal harmony. It's generally less active in terms of harmonic rhythm. There's a lot of times when you're on a single chord for a long time, as in our example tune. That's basically all on the 1 chord, and then it goes to the other chords at the end of the phrase. Making the point that there's a lot of time spent on a single chord, and most of that extra time is spent on the 1 chord rather than any other. The chord progressions often alternate between the 1 chord and a character chord. This song spent a long time on the 1 chord, as you can see, and when it cadences, it does go to a character chord. This is 5 minor, which is a character chord in Mixolydian, the mode that we're in here. But then it quickly goes to a 4, very briefly back to 1, the 4 major. So but the effect is pretty much like a cadential 5 minor to 1 with this just quick little inserted chord here. Later on in the song, in the bridge, it goes to a different mode. It goes to a parallel mode, It was an E Mixolydian, then it's going along. Sorry, let me start at the beginning. Here comes the bridge. Back to the major sound. So I want you to take a minute here, and this is where the bridge begins, and see if you can figure out what mode it goes into. And when you do that, you can, for a second, you can ignore that chord, but everything else should clue you in. So these 4 measures, what mode are they in? You figured out that it goes to Dorian, the mode that we were thinking about earlier. 1 minor, 4 major, 1 minor, 2 minor. And then this chord is a borrowed chord. Up until now it's been purely Dorian. But this chord is borrowed from the parallel major. In other words, 5, 7, and 1 in E major, or you could say it's 5, 7, and 1 in E minor with harmonic minor. And this is not uncommon in modal music. You'll have the song will be going along fairly purely modal, and then they'll just borrow a chord, and usually it is the 5, 7 of 1 that they borrow. So this chord is not diatonic, but it's okay. The reason we can use this is because it's going 5, 7 to 1 in the mode. If it was a diatonic dominant 7th chord to the relative major, for example, in this case of E Dorian, if it went to the parent major scale is D, if it went to A7 down to D, that would be a problem because it would make it sound like it's gone to D major. But this is a borrowed 5 of 1 in the mode, and so this kind of thing is used quite commonly. Anyway, this is a good example of what was said a minute ago, that often modal progressions will alternate between the 1 and the character chord. So you've got the 1, 4 character chord, 1, 2 character chord, and then the borrowed 5 chord, which of course gets us back not to E Dorian but back to E Mixolydian. Okay, this brings us to one of the assignments I'd like you to do. Here is a list of characteristics of each mode that are used compositionally. The Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and Mixolydian, and Aeolian. Locrian is not used compositionally because it doesn't have a perfect fifth above the root of the mode, and therefore it can't manage to sound resolved, so it's hard to create a piece of music where the 1 chord doesn't sound like a resolution. But most common are these 5 modes, and what I want you to do is look at the first mode, which I filled in for you. I've put in the formula, the character note, the diatonic chords, then the character chords, the chords which have contain the character note, scale degree 6, and the avoid chords, of course, the diminished triad and the minor 7 flat 5 chord that are diatonic. And then the avoid progression. The avoid progression is what I demonstrated earlier in the video, having 1 minor 7 go to 4 7 down to flat 7 major 7, which would end up making it sound like 2 5 1 in the related major key. So that's the avoid progression. And there's going to be one of those in every single mode. You just have to transpose it. These are common characteristic progressions. I've filled those in the other parts of the chart, so you don't have to do that part. And then some song examples, and I've filled some of those in too, and we can add to that. So basically what I want you to do is fill in the top 6 rows of each one of these for the remaining modes. And you can literally copy this stuff out of the book, but the act of writing it down and thinking about it will help you absorb it. But all this information is right in the book. And so that's a homework assignment that I would like to see you have done and show me in the next class.